There is a specific kind of injustice that runs through Hollywood like a current, quiet, structural, and almost never addressed directly while it is happening. It is the injustice of the person who makes the thing work being compensated as though they are incidental to it. Don Knotts spent 5 seasons on The Andy Griffith Show, winning Emmy Awards at a rate that has almost no parallel in the history of American television comedy. 5 performances, 5 Emmys. The show he appeared in was one of the highest-rated programs in the country for the entirety of his time on it, and the character he played, Deputy Sheriff Barney Fife, nervous, overconfident, endlessly hapless, and somehow irresistible, became one of the most beloved comic creations in the history of the medium. What he got paid for all of that is a number that, when you say it out loud in the context of everything else that was happening financially on that show, sounds less like a salary and more like an oversight. Jesse Donald Knotts was born on July 21, 1924, in Morgantown, West Virginia, the youngest of 4 brothers in a family that had been shaped significantly by hardship. His father suffered from severe mental illness and died when Knotts was a child, leaving his mother to hold the household together on her own. He was a slight, anxious child who discovered early that making people laugh was both a reliable defense mechanism and a genuine talent. He taught himself ventriloquism as a young teenager, performing with a dummy he called Danny Matador at local events, and the discipline required to master that form. The precise timing, the absolute control of expression, while managing a secondary performance simultaneously, gave him a technical foundation that would underpin everything he did for the rest of his career. He served in the U.S. Army during the Second World War, entertaining troops in the Pacific with a theater unit, and after the war enrolled at West Virginia University on the GI Bill, graduating with a degree in education before deciding that education was not going to be his life. He moved to New York, worked in radio, appeared in bit parts on early television, and eventually landed on Broadway in 1955 in the original production of No Time for Sergeants, a military comedy that also starred a relatively unknown actor from North Carolina named Andy Griffith. The two men recognized something in each other immediately. The friendship they formed in those Broadway dressing rooms would define both of their professional lives for the next 50 years, though they could not have known it at the time. When No Time for Sergeants was adapted for television and then for film, Knotts and Griffith worked together again on both. By 1960, when Griffith was offered his own CBS sitcom, one of the first calls he made was to his old Broadway friend. He asked Knotts if he would be interested in joining the show. Knotts said yes. Here is the financial reality of that decision. When The Andy Griffith Show launched in 1960, the business architecture surrounding it had been constructed almost entirely in Griffith's favor. Not through any particular cunning on Griffith's part, but through the aggressive and prescient negotiating of his manager, Dick Link. Link understood that CBS needed Andy Griffith more than Andy Griffith needed CBS, and he leveraged that reality into something unusual for the era. A deal that gave Griffith a majority ownership stake in the show itself. This was not a standard arrangement. Most television actors in 1960 were employees of the network or the production company. They received salaries, and the network retained ownership of everything the show generated in perpetuity. Griffith's deal was different. He had a financial interest in the program, which meant that as the show climbed the ratings, and it climbed quickly, settling into the top 5 almost immediately and staying there, his income scaled accordingly. Syndication rights, which would eventually generate enormous revenue as the show became a permanent fixture of American television culture, belonged in significant part to him. He also carried genuine creative authority as a result of that ownership stake, which gave him control over casting, tone, and content in a way that no salaried cast member could match. Don Knotts' arrangement was the straightforward kind. He was paid a salary. There was no ownership stake, no profit participation, no back-end deal tied to the show's performance. He earned approximately $1,250 per episode, which, across a full production season, worked out to roughly $35,000 per year. His own manager, Sherwin Bash, addressed this figure directly in later interviews, describing the contract as a terrible deal and acknowledging that Knotts made no significant money across the 5 years he spent on the show. That is a remarkable admission. A manager characterizing his own client's most famous contract as, in financial terms, a failure. The Emmy Awards, which came with extraordinary regularity, told one story about the value of what Knotts was producing. The pay stubs told another story entirely. By the end of the fifth season, Knotts had won his fifth Emmy and had spent 5 years watching The Andy Griffith Show generate cultural and commercial momentum that translated directly into wealth for its owner. He made the decision that he needed to have a specific conversation with Griffith. Not about leaving, but about the financial arrangement that had governed his time on the show and whether it could be renegotiated going forward. The conversation happened. What exactly was said in that room has never been fully documented by either party, and the accounts that have emerged over the years are incomplete in ways that make it difficult to reconstruct with precision. What is documented is the outcome. No agreement was reached. Knotts had received an offer from Universal Pictures to make films, a genuine opportunity to headline his own projects rather than support someone else's. And when the conversation with Griffith failed to produce the financial adjustment he had been seeking, the Universal offer became the path he chose. He left the show at the conclusion of that fifth season. Barney Fife would return for guest appearances in later years, but his time as the living center of the series, the performance around which so many of the show's best episodes had been constructed, was finished. What followed was a film career that worked better than most people outside the business would have predicted. Universal gave Knotts a series of starring vehicles that translated his specific comic persona from the small screen to theaters with genuine commercial success. The Ghost and Mr. Chicken in 1966 was the first and arguably the best of these. A horror comedy built entirely around his signature combination of physical cowardice and desperate overcompensation, and it found a substantial audience. The Reluctant Astronaut and The Shakiest Gun in the West followed in the late 1960s. Neither of them critical achievements, but both profitable enough to sustain his standing as a reliable box office performer. He formed a comedic partnership with Tim Conway during this period, a pairing of two technically precise comedians who understood each other's timing completely, and the films they made together drew warmly from audiences throughout the early 1970s. Then, in 1979, he joined the cast of Three's Company as Ralph Furley, the landlord whose physical comedy and self-delusion made him an immediate favorite with a generation that had grown up too late to know Barney Fife. He remained on that show until 1984, introducing himself to a completely new audience while maintaining the essential qualities that had made him remarkable from the beginning. Throughout all of it, he and Andy Griffith remained close. The professional departure had not become a personal fracture, which speaks to something important about the nature of the friendship. It had predated the show, it had survived the financial disagreement, and it continued long after both men's careers moved in separate directions. When Knotts made guest appearances on Matlock, Griffith's long-running legal drama of the 1980s and 1990s, Griffith was candid enough with him to say that certain habits Knotts had picked up during his Three's Company years were making his comedy too broad. The kind of direct professional critique that only genuine friendship allows.